I'm going to cut to the chase because you clicked for gauntlet lore, but I am not the one delivering it. We are once again joined today by Wade Allen, a collector, student, and maker of Western European armor for over 30 years. This is a recording of the show and tell demonstration he gave at the Forging 2025, an annual-ish event where armorers from all over the country get together to learn from one another. Wade brought a selection of real extant pieces from his collection for us to study together, so while you may not be able to reach through the screen and play with the pieces as we were able to in person, I hope you'll nevertheless learn a thing or two about how historical armor was constructed, both from an aesthetic and practical perspective. If you didn't see part 1 about breastplates and backplates, go ahead and do that. I'll put it on the screen somewhere. But otherwise, buckle up for 10 minutes of gauntlet analysis.
Okay, gauntlets. I'll play with gauntlets some. This will seem like sort of a funny little place to start, but for somebody who's interested in how the mechanics of a gauntlet works, this is a really nice piece. I ended up buying it in auction, and Leonid Heinrich from the Met, one of their armorers at the Met, had owned it. And I think he did things that you shouldn't do and popped 2 rivets out so he could actually get at the whole plate. So there are 2 bolts here, and you can actually take it apart and see what the back edge of a plate looks like from the outside that nobody can usually see. So what we have is just a mitten-form gauntlet. It rolls up to fit to your hand as necessary. It straightens out as usual, of course. That all needs to happen. It also has slots in every one of these things, and so that lets you get twist. It lets you get extra hand motion that really is kind of nice to have. It has all these beautiful flutes that match up and play games. It's really a very nice little piece. Because it doesn't look like a gauntlet, it didn't cost very much. But because it has all the nice mechanics, it's really good as a study piece. And on the inside, we can just sort of see how all of this stuff works. This is one of the things that happens. Those plates overlap each other all over the place. You jam in and they're thin, it works. It just works. So you can play with this and twist it and move it around and see how something really should look in order to make it work correctly. Okay? Yes?
So obviously the plates aren't intended to round out on the half of the weapon.
No.
That's a line. The orientation of the articulation, they're not like 180 degrees.
No, they're not close to parallel. See? There, you should be able to get that, right? There we go. Yeah, that's for the camera, so we can see that later. But yeah, they're not even close to parallel. And? It is an example of articulation. It is an example of something moves, and it violates many of the known rules from the hammer in 1980s. Oh well, too bad. It has a little part of its hinge to hold the thumb on, so it's a right. Little details. If you take a mechanical engineering class and do stress strain diagrams, putting little cusps in the centers of things is a terrible idea. It's a stress concentration point, and it's going to do terrible things to your armor. And this one broke in half because it's much prettier with the cusp. Put the cusp in. Actually, when Aaron and I were making a pair of 16th century gauntlets, we put a crease down the back, and nope, I don't have one of those. And we put a crease down the back. The whole thing worked. We put a crease in, and it didn't work anymore. The plates fit closely enough that when we bent it back, they caught. We put the cusp in, and it worked beautifully. So the cusp is cute, and if you've got a crease, it can actually serve a purpose too. Everybody loves them a Gothic gauntlet. So here, we have a Gothic gauntlet. Now, the fingers are fake. They're not bad. They're a decent copy. The concept is about right, but they're not old. The thumb, some portion of it is fake, at least the front and probably also even the base plate. That part is good. So it bends and allows you to bend your wrist down. It bends up, allows the wrist to bend up. It has slots to allow it to bend side to side. It fits closely to the wrist, or to the forearm, so you need to have that motion in the wrist. A lot of later ones have a bigger bell, and the hourglass certainly has a huge bell to allow motion inside it. Cute decoration, cute flutes, little narrow roll. The things that I sort of leap to see here is the flutes aren't really all that deep. The flutes aren't necessarily all that crisp. They have little engraved lines that make them pop, that make you see them, that let your eye, fool your eye into thinking there's more there. The roll on the edge, even on some of Maximilian's nice gauntlets, well, lower end ones, that don't have brass all over, are not terribly clean sometimes. He says with a grimace over here. Look at how gross and disgusting that roll is. And see how the points of the lines cut across each other and cut into the other side? We see that on Maximilian's gauntlets. They just did it. There's things we care about. Everything's got to be crisp and clean. There's things that they didn't give a rat about. And there are things we don't care about, wavy surfaces, that they cared a huge amount about. So this is another way to see what they cared about as their aesthetic. I think I managed to purchase this because it has an ugly as sin cuff. I mean, what idiot would build a cuff like that on a gauntlet? I mean, really, yuck. So what we have here is an elbow gauntlet, but it's an elbow gauntlet that was likely designed to be used with an elbow cop because the roll ends here. So this is a raw edge. You would want that up underneath something to cover it up and make it cool. It's also been squashed. Somebody sat on it. And somebody else decided to hang it off of something, so there's a nail. There you go, there's the nail. Run through the piece. And on the outside, that'll stay on the dummy. So let's ignore that and move on. There was mention of different finishes yesterday. A russet finish. As Dave mentioned, you rust it and let it settle in. There's a russet finish. And I think it's probably the remains of an original russet finish. So this will give you an idea of what kind of color, and it's probably darker than it was, but the idea is right. The reason this comes along is how beautifully the plates move on each other. It just, your hand can't do that, but it just works. Everything fits. Everything moves beautifully. When you're making a piece of armor, you aim for this. When you miss and do not achieve it, I own ones that don't work well at all. Okay, too bad. But you're aiming for this. This is your goal. It's glorious to play with.
Wait.
Yes?
Why is there a ridge across the knuckles?
Yeah.
Because it's cool. Because humans who don't have enough on their body have this big, nasty, sticky, outy, yucky thing.
I think he's talking about across that.
Here? Oh, okay, sorry. They have ones here too. Not that one. The Gothic one has it. It is one style of how you build a knuckle. To make a gauntlet work, it needs to be able to bend. You don't hold swords like that, right? So that knuckle needs to be able to bend. You can make something that will do that many different ways. You can just make it as an angle plate. You can make it as a series of bumps that do the curve. In the 16th century, many times they adopted an aesthetic of a ridge that went all the way across and provided that function. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, Aaron and I were trying to automate some of this, and we made a little tool and we made the bump and it was all cool, and it didn't work at all. Look closely at it. The little tiny edges that are hanging off of it, little teeny little edges, have shape. They're not flat. They give you that curve to let it settle in. What you need is the plate to have that change of angle. What you can have is decoration. And I'm sure it stiffens it up a little bit, and actually probably stiffens it a lot. And they seem to have been a little sloppy about the manufacture, so I often see cracking in the corners because, you know, they get thin there. And, well, they got thin there. It's what lets you do this in order to do this.
So it's first function, then aesthetics, not.
I don't know. I mean, you know, I think the goal is to make you look good and then protect you. Other people would go exactly the opposite, but you gotta have both. You just gotta have both. Yeah.
Ergonomically, that first knuckle has to have 90 degrees of motion. How you get there is, you know, that's gotta have 90 degrees of motion. Second knuckle needs 90 degrees of motion. Third knuckle needs 45. And they're specific in lining those up where you can, it's a system compromised in distance. But whatever you do, this knuckle needs 90 degrees.
So that mitten, in fact, overachieves what a hand can really do. But it is not attempting to do, you know, 90, 90, something. It turns it into a curve. But here, yeah, you gotta get your fingers out of the way or you can't grab anything. They gotta be able to grip. The specific shape, you get all sorts of crazy shapes. There's some big wide roped things that are relatively flat. There's some peaky things. There are points, you know, all the Gothic points, but you're achieving an angle change between this plate and this plate. They tend to sort of lip the little edge of these two plates, which lets them cheat that other plate so you don't have to have it all just in the one plate. But sometimes they don't, sometimes they do.
And get it in a sense. Having that double washer lets you put two joints close together. And if each of the joints gets you 45 degrees, you've got your 90 in a small package.
Yeah, so if you just have one side bending, you got to get the whole 90 out of it. If you have both sides bending, you can go both ways. Yeah.
So that 16th century gauntlet, is contrast motion, direction, or lack of
good.
Versus
Very, very good. Tom has picked up on an interesting point. When I showed you the Gothic, the late 15th century one, it had sliders in it. So you could do this with your wrist. Around 1500, they gave up on that. I mean, they just did. They just said, sorry, don't need that. Something changed. And I don't know quite what it is. So the Russet Mitten Gauntlet has no slots anywhere. That's just the way it is.
in spite of having a long cuff that fits the forearm.
In spite of having a long cuff that fits the forearm. Usually past 15, 20, you've got a wider cuff so you can get some more slop in there, usually. But even on the tight Maximilian cuffs, the little short cuffs that I have seen, there are no slots in the back of the hand. It's just different. Yes?
Would the Russet Mitten Gauntlet be used primarily for jousting?
No. No, I don't think so. It's not thick. It's not especially interesting. It's not a manifer. I'm certain it was cavalry, but I'm making that up. No, it's too thin for that.
Cavalry, and the left arm is
The left arm, yeah.
the reins.
You don't.
So you're not moving around a whole lot.
Oh yeah, you don't need to do much with this hand. You know, so you're not pointing your gun and shooting people, which many of these guys were doing. You're not waving your sword around. I mean, there are just a lot of 16th century pieces that give you good motion this way, some motion this way that's not too bad, about as much as you can do with a fist, and then whatever slop you get in the cuff. That's just the way they were doing things. Okay.
Thanks so much for watching. Part 3 of this lecture will be up next week, where Wade will tell us about arm defenses. And if you miss my regular content, never fear, that will also be returning soon. And if you have no idea what my usual content is, I make video essays about art history, fashion, and material culture, usually through the lens of Western European armor. And if that sounds like your kind of thing, I hope you'll like, subscribe, and consider supporting the channel on Ko-fi. Until next time, stay shiny.